The Georgia cold case that shattered a community in 2005 finally found its shocking resolution 17 years later. Tara Grinstead was just 30 years old when she vanished from her home in Ocilla, Georgia on October 23, 2005. Her car sat untouched in the driveway, her cell phone still charging inside, her front door locked tight, but Tara was gone without a trace. For over a decade, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation followed thousands of leads through woods and rivers, chasing shadows and whispers that led nowhere. The silence became a wound that refused to heal in this small town of 3,000 souls. Then in February 2017, everything changed when a tip led investigators to Ryan Duke, a former student who had once sat in Tarara's own classroom. His confession revealed a truth so devastating it would fracture the community all over again. How could the answer have been hiding among them all along? Before we get into the story, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. The autumn air carried the scent of turned earth and dying leaves through Ocilla's quiet streets on October 22, 2005. Inside the high school auditorium, teenage girls in evening gowns stepped carefully across the wooden stage, their nervous smiles catching the warm glow of overhead lights. Tara Grinstead sat in the front row, her dark hair pulled back, hands clasped together as she watched her students compete in the Sweet Potato Festival beauty pageant. She had spent weeks preparing them for this moment. Hours after school helping with hair, makeup, and walking techniques, Tara believed in these young women, saw potential in each nervous laugh and stumbled step. When 17-year-old Hannah Morris won the crown, Tara's applause rang louder than anyone else's in the small auditorium. "Miss Grinstead, thank you for everything," Hannah whispered as she hugged her teacher backstage, the rhinestone tiara still catching light in her blonde hair. Tara smiled, the kind of smile that had made her beloved throughout Irwin County. "You earned this, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." The pageant program, printed on cheap paper with the local bank's advertisement on the back, listed Tara as coach and mentor. It was a role she took seriously, just like everything else in her life. Teaching 11th grade history at Irwin County High School wasn't just a job for Tara, it was a calling. As the auditorium emptied and the custodian began folding metal chairs, Tara gathered her purse and keys. She had promised to attend a cookout at a former student's house afterward, but exhaustion weighed on her shoulders. The past few weeks had been demanding, balancing lesson plans with pageant preparations, grading papers late into the night. "You coming to Marcus Place?" asked another teacher, but Tara shook her head. "I think I'll head home early morning tomorrow." She walked alone to her car under the October stars, her footsteps echoing in the empty parking lot. The drive home to 300 West Highway 319 took less than 10 minutes. Everything in Ocilla was less than 10 minutes away. Her white 2005 Honda Civic pulled into the familiar driveway beside her house, a modest ranch-style home she rented from a local family. Tara climbed the front steps, fishing her keys from her purse. The porch light cast long shadows across the yard as she unlocked the front door and stepped inside. She set her purse on the kitchen counter, plugged her cell phone into its charger, and finally allowed herself to breathe. Tomorrow was another day of teaching, another day of reaching young minds and helping them see beyond the borders of their small town. Tara had big dreams herself, dreams of marriage, children, a family of her own. At 30, she sometimes felt the weight of those unfulfilled hopes, but she never let that dim the light she brought to others. She changed into comfortable clothes and settled in for the evening, unaware that these would be her last quiet moments in the home she loved. The phone rang 15 times before going to voicemail. It rang again 5 minutes later. And again, "It's me. Call me back," said the voice on the answering machine. Outside, the white Honda Civic sat exactly where she had parked it the night before, dew collecting on its windshield in the cool morning air. The October sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows across the front yard where Tara's closest friends now stood, worry etched deep in their faces. "Her car's here," said Maria Woods, a fellow teacher who had driven over when Tara didn't answer her phone, but she didn't come to church this morning. She never misses church. They had been friends since Tara moved to Ocilla 5 years earlier. Maria knew Tara's routines better than anyone's Sunday morning service at Ocilla Church of God, followed by lunch with friends. It was as predictable as sunrise and just as reliable. "Maybe she's sick," suggested another friend. But even as she said it, doubt crept into her voice. Maria tried the front door. Locked. She walked around to the back of the house, checking windows. calling Tara's name. Everything appeared normal from the outside. No signs of struggle, no broken glass, no forced entry. The silence felt heavy. Wrong. Somehow Tara's cell phone sat on the kitchen counter inside, its green light blinking as it charged. The device that had become an extension of her hand, constantly buzzing with messages from students, family, and friends, now lay silent and abandoned. The phone held the last digital traces of her Saturday evening missed calls from friends, text messages that would never be answered. The unanswered cell phone would become the first piece of evidence in a mystery that would consume the town for over a decade. Its silence spoke louder than any scream, a technological witness to an absence that made no sense. Maria pressed her face to the kitchen window. Seeing the phone's familiar pink case on the counter, Tara never went anywhere without that phone. Never. Something's wrong, Maria whispered to herself, her breath fogging the glass. Something's very wrong. The autumn morning that had started with such promise now carried an undertone of dread. In a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, Tara Grinstead had simply vanished without a word to anyone. Maria reached for her own phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed. Some calls change everything. This would be one of them. Monday morning brought the harsh reality that Tara Grinstead was not at Irwin County High School. Her classroom door remained locked as students gathered in the hallway. Confusion rippling through the groups of teenagers. The woman who had never missed a day without notice, who often arrived before the custodians and stayed long after the buses left, was simply absent. "Where's Miss Grinstead?" asked Jessica, one of Tara's 11th graders, peering through the small window in the classroom door. Principal Wesley Gordon hurried down the hallway, his face grim. He had been making phone calls since 7 a.m. trying to reach Tara, calling her emergency contacts, growing more concerned with each unanswered ring. By 10 a.m., Ocilla police officer Kenneth Royal was standing on Tara's front porch. His hand raised to knock on the door his colleague was about to force open. The lock gave way with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the quiet neighborhood. The house exhaled its secret slowly. Tara's purse sat undisturbed on the kitchen counter, her wallet and credit card still inside. Her keys hung on their hook by the front door. The bed was unmade, but that told them nothing Tara might have left in a hurry. It was Officer Royal who noticed the bedroom window first. "Over here," he called to his partner. The window was unlocked, though whether from the inside or outside they couldn't tell. The screen showed no obvious damage, but it wasn't seated properly in its frame. In the soft dirt beneath the window there were faint impressions that might have been footprints, though rain from the previous week had softened the ground beyond clear definition. The unlocked bedroom window would haunt investigators for years. It represented possibility and doubt in equal measure, a potential point of entry, or perhaps just evidence of Tara's habit of sleeping with fresh air. In a case that would be built on fragments and theories, this window became a symbol of all the answers that remained just out of reach. No signs of struggle inside, Officer Royal noted in his report. The house held no evidence of violence, no overturned furniture, no broken glass, no blood. It was as if Tara had simply walked outside and dissolved into the October air. Detective Gary Rothell from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation arrived that afternoon, his trained eyes scanning the scene that local officers had carefully preserved. He photographed the window, the dirt below it, the untouched interior of the house, but photographs couldn't capture the wrongness that hung in the air. The sense that something terrible had interrupted the normal rhythms of a school teacher's quiet life. The October wind pushed through the open window, rustling papers on Tarara's desk, where lesson plans for the week lay neatly organized. She had been prepared for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. She had been prepared for everything except disappearing. By Tuesday morning, Ocilla had transformed into something resembling a military operation. The Irwin County Sheriff's Office set up a command center in the courthouse, phones ringing constantly as tips poured in from across South Georgia. Volunteers arrived by the dozens, teachers from neighboring counties, church members, former students, and complete strangers who had heard about the missing teacher on the morning news. "We need to organize into groups," announced Sheriff Donnie Yarrow, standing before a crowd of nearly 200 people gathered in the courthouse parking lot. "We'll search every inch of this county if we have to." The search party flyers appeared on every telephone pole and storefront window within hours. Tara's smiling face looked out from hundreds of photocopied sheets. Missing Tara Faye Grinstead, 30 years old. Last seen October 22nd. Below her photograph, details that would become burned into the community's collective memory. Height, weight, hair color, the clothes she might have been wearing. Marie Grinstead, Tara's older sister, drove down from Hawkinsville to help coordinate the volunteer efforts. She had always been the protective one, and now that protective instinct had nowhere to focus except organizing search teams and making sure no stone was left unturned. "Tara's out there somewhere," Marie told the assembled volunteers, her voice carrying across the parking lot. "She's counting on us to find her." The team spread out like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Some took boats down the Ocmulgee River, dragging hooks through the dark water and calling Tara's name across the swampland. Others walked through pine forests and pecan orchards, pushing aside undergrowth and checking abandoned buildings. Helicopters from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation circled overhead, their rotors churning the autumn air as they followed the Ocmulgee's winding path. The sound became a constant backdrop to the search, a mechanical heartbeat that reminded everyone that time was passing. "Check every hunting cabin, every old barn," instructed Detective Rothell. "Look for anything that seems out of place." The search flyers became more than just tools. They were prayers made physical, hope photocopied and distributed to anyone who would take one. Store clerks taped them to cash registers. Gas station attendants hung them by the pumps. Long-haul truckers carried stacks of them to distribute along their routes. But as the sun set on Tuesday and the volunteers began to disperse, their empty hands told the story. The woods had kept their secrets. The river had given up nothing. Tara remained lost. The whispers started on Wednesday. "I heard she was seeing someone new," said one voice in the grocery store checkout line. "My cousin thinks it was a break-in gone wrong," replied another. "But nothing was stolen," a third person pointed out. "Her purse was right there." The Ocilla Gazette published its first front-page story about Tarara's disappearance that Wednesday morning. But the real news spread faster through the informal networks that bind small towns together. Every coffee shop conversation, every phone call between neighbors, every chance encounter at the post office carried another theory, another suspicion, another name whispered with raised eyebrows. Marcus Harper, Tarara's former boyfriend, found himself at the center of speculation he never asked for. They had dated for 6 years, even became engaged before breaking up the previous year. In a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, their relationship had been as public as their breakup. "People are saying things," Marcus told his friends, exhaustion clear in his voice. "They're looking at me like I did something." The local newspaper headlines grew bolder with each passing day. "Teacher still missing." Then search continues for beloved educator. And finally, no leads in Grinstead disappearance. Each headline reflected the growing desperation of a community watching. Hope slowly drained away. Detective Rothell found himself fielding calls from people who had suddenly remembered suspicious behavior from months or even years earlier. A man who had asked too many questions about Tara at a local restaurant. A car seen parked near her house at an unusual hour. A former student who had seemed too interested in his teacher. "We're following every lead," Rothell told reporters at Thursday's press conference. Behind him, officers carried boxes of files that grew thicker each day. But following leads and solving cases were different things entirely. Each tip that seemed promising faded under closer examination. Each suspect who looked suspicious on paper had solid alibis. Each theory that gained traction crumbled when confronted with facts. The headlines reflected a truth that was becoming impossible to ignore. Someone in their community knew what had happened to Tara Grinstead, and they weren't talking. Friendships that had lasted decades began to crack under the weight of suspicion. People studied their neighbors' faces for signs of guilt, trust. The invisible foundation of small-town life started to erode. The CNN news van pulled into Ocilla on Friday morning, followed by trucks from Fox News, ABC, and 3 newspapers from Atlanta. Suddenly, Tara's face was everywhere. A beloved teacher vanishes from a small Georgia town, reported the network anchors standing in front of Irwin County High School, where Tara had inspired students for 5 years. Tonight on America's Most Wanted, the mysterious disappearance of Tara Grinstead. Marie Grinstead found herself thrust into a spotlight she never wanted, sitting across from reporters and answering the same questions over and over. What was Tara like? Did she have enemies? Was she planning to leave town? Tara loved her students, Marie told a CNN reporter holding one of the missing person posters that had become ubiquitous throughout South Georgia. She loved teaching. She loved this community. She would never just disappear. The missing person poster had been hastily designed on Wednesday, but it captured something essential about Tara: her warm smile, the kindness in her eyes, the professional photograph from her teaching portfolio that showed her exactly as her students remembered her. The poster became more than a tool for finding Tara. It became a symbol of everything the community had lost. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation designated the case as one of the largest missing person investigations in the state's history. Agent Gary Rothel found himself coordinating with the FBI, the State Patrol, and multiple county sheriff's departments as the search expanded beyond Irwin County's borders. "We've received over 300 tips in the past week," Rothel announced at Friday's press conference. "We're following up on every single one." Behind the scenes, investigators were building a timeline of Tara's last known movements. Security cameras from the high school showed her leaving after the beauty pageant. A neighbor remembered seeing her car in the driveway that night. But between Saturday evening and Monday morning lay a gap that no witness could fill. The media attention brought volunteers from across the Southeast. But it also brought the inevitable parade of psychics, conspiracy theorists, and attention seekers who attached themselves to high-profile cases. Separating genuine tips from background noise became a full-time job for the GBI. National television exposure meant Tara's story reached millions of people, but it also meant her family's private grief became public property. Every tear, every plea for information, every moment of hope or despair was captured by cameras and broadcast to strangers across the country. 3 weeks after Tara disappeared, Agent Rothel stood before a room full of reporters and delivered the news everyone had been dreading. "At this time, we have no solid leads in the disappearance of Tara Grinstead," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of the words. "The investigation remains active, but we're asking for the public's continued assistance." The GBI press conference transcript would become a historical document, marking the moment when hope began its slow transformation into something harder to maintain. The confident predictions of a quick resolution had given way to the grim reality of modern investigation. "Sometimes people simply vanish, and sometimes the answers don't come quickly. We've searched over 200 square miles," continued Rothwell. "We followed up on more than 500 tips. We will not give up." But his words carried the weight of truth that everyone understood. They were no closer to finding Tara than they had been on that first Monday morning when she failed to show up for work. Behind the podium, boxes of evidence told the story of an investigation that had consumed thousands of man-hours. Phone records had been analyzed. Financial records had been scrutinized. DNA samples had been collected and tested. Security footage from every business in a 50-mile radius had been reviewed. The trail had simply gone cold. "Cases like this can take time," Rothel explained to frustrated family members. "Sometimes years, but they can also break open suddenly." With one good tip, the press conference marked a turning point in the investigation's public face. The daily updates stopped. The search parties became smaller and less frequent. The media moved on to other stories, other tragedies, other mysteries. But in Ocilla, the absence of answers created its own presence. Tara's empty classroom remained locked. Her parking space at school stayed empty. Her photograph continued to stare out from bulletin boards and store windows, now faded by weeks of autumn Sunday. The investigation would continue, but quietly now, with detectives following paper trails and cold tips, instead of leading armies of volunteers through the woods. The spectacular search was over. The long wait had begun. December brought its own cruelty to Ocilla. Christmas lights appeared on houses throughout the town, but 300 West Highway 319 remained dark. Tara's landlord had sealed the house after investigators finished processing it as a crime scene, and now it stood empty, a monument to unanswered questions. The first memorial vigil was held on December 15th, exactly 2 months after Tara's disappearance. More than 400 people gathered in the high school parking lot as evening shadows stretched across the asphalt. They held candles that flickered in the December wind, their flames dancing like prayers made visible. "Tara touched so many lives," said Principal Gordon, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "Tonight we remember her, and we remember our hope." Marie Grinstead stood at the center of the gathering, holding a photograph of her sister taken just weeks before the disappearance. In the picture, Tara was laughing at something off camera, her eyes bright with the kind of joy that seemed impossible to extinguish. The memorial candlelight program was simple. a single sheet of paper with Tara's photograph and a prayer printed in elegant script. But for the people holding those programs, it represented something more profound: the community's refusal to let Tara simply fade away. Students from her classes shared memories that brought both tears and smiles. Hannah Morris, the beauty pageant winner, spoke about how Tara had taught her to believe in herself. Former students who had graduated years earlier drove from Atlanta and Savannah to be there. "She made you feel like you were the most important person in the world when she talked to you," said one young woman, now a college sophomore. "She never gave up on anyone." As the vigil ended, and people dispersed into the December night, many lingered in small groups, reluctant to let go of the shared comfort. The candles had burned down to stubs, but their light had illuminated something important. Tara's impact couldn't be measured by her physical presence. The program from that first vigil would be saved by dozens of people tucked into Bibles and photo albums. A tangible reminder of a night when an entire community came together to hold darkness at bay. But even as they remembered her, a harder truth was settling in. This might not be the last vigil they would hold. October came again, bringing with it the terrible anniversary that no one wanted to acknowledge. 1 year, 365 days since Tara Grinstead had vanished from Ocilla, and the investigation had advanced no further than those first frantic weeks. Agent Rothell still returned calls from the GBI's Atlanta headquarters. The reward fund had grown to over $100,000, but the silence remained absolute. The second annual vigil drew a smaller crowd than the first. Time has a way of wearing down even the strongest community bonds, and some families had simply grown weary of gathering to remember someone who might never be found. Still, nearly 200 people came, their faces now familiar with this particular kind of grief. Annual vigil photos became a tradition that no one wanted to start. The first few years, professional photographers from the local newspaper documented each gathering. Later, family members took informal pictures with cell phones, creating a visual timeline of a community learning to live with permanent loss. The investigation files had grown to fill an entire cabinet in the GBI office. Each October brought renewed media attention, follow-up stories asking, "Whatever happened to Tara Grinstead?" But the follow-up stories grew shorter each year, relegated to page 3, then page 5, then the inside sections where stories go to die quietly. Cold cases don't stay cold forever. Detective Rothwell reminded himself. Whenever frustration threatened to overwhelm him, he had moved on to other investigations, other missing persons, other families desperate for answers. But Tara's file never moved far from his desk. By 2009, the fourth anniversary vigil drew fewer than 50 people. The crowd was mostly family and close friends, the core group that refused to let go. Marie Grinstead had aged visibly in those 4 years, her face carrying lines that hadn't been there before her sister's disappearance. The vigil photos from those middle years show something heartbreaking, a community slowly forgetting how to hope. The candles were smaller, the crowds were thinner, the prayers were more resigned, but they kept gathering every October, as if their faithfulness alone might be enough to bring Tara home. The podcast started in 2010 as a graduate students project at the University of Georgia. Up and Vanished would eventually reach millions of listeners worldwide. But it began with Payne Lindsay driving down to Ocilla with a digital recorder and a determination to understand what had happened to Tara Grinstead. The case had fascinated him since college, not just the disappearance itself, but the way an entire community had been forced to live with uncertainty. The podcast interview recordings captured voices that had been largely silent for 5 years. Former students, now adults with careers and families of their own, spoke about Tara's impact on their lives. Colleagues remembered her dedication and kindness. Investigators shared what they could about an ongoing case. "She wasn't just my teacher," said one former student in an episode that aired in November 2016. "She was like a second mom to all of us. She believed in us when we didn't believe in ourselves." The renewed media attention brought something unexpected. Tips the GBI phone lines quiet for months suddenly buzzed with calls from people who had heard the podcast and remembered something from years earlier. Most led nowhere, but Detective Rothell dutifully followed up on each one. The podcast did more than just rehash old facts. It introduced Tarara's story to a new generation of listeners who applied fresh eyes to evidence that investigators had been studying for over a decade. Social media groups formed. Amateur investigators shared theories. The case that had grown cold in the Georgia heat suddenly found new life in the digital age. But the most important impact of the renewed attention wasn't the tips or the theories. It was the reminder that Tara Grinstead had been a real person, with real dreams, not just a name on a missing person poster. The young teacher who had cared so deeply about her students found herself surrounded by strangers who cared deeply about finding her. By early 2017, Up and Vanished had reached the top of the iTunes podcast charts. Tara's story was being heard around the world. Her photograph shared across social media platforms that hadn't existed when she disappeared. Something was building. Something that felt different from all the false leads and cold trails that had come before. The classroom at Irwin County High, school that had once belonged to Tara Grinstead, finally found a permanent occupant in 2016. Mrs. Jennifer Williams, a young teacher fresh from Georgia Southern University, tried not to think about the memorial plaque that hung beside the door. In memory of Tara Grinstead, beloved teacher and friend, whose light continues to shine in the lives she touched. The classroom memorial plaque had been installed on the 5th anniversary of Tara's disappearance, a gesture that felt both honoring and final. Students still occasionally asked about the teacher who disappeared, but for most, Tarara had become ancient history, something that happened before they were born or when they were too young to remember. She taught my older brother. One student mentioned to Mrs. Williams during lunch. He said she was really cool. Mrs. Williams had inherited more than just a classroom. She had inherited the weight of a ghost. The students who had been seniors, when Tara disappeared, were now adults with children of their own. The school had moved on, but the memory remained, embedded in the hallways like a shadow that never quite faded. The memorial plaque was simple brass installed by the school district after years of discussion about how to honor Tarara without creating a permanent shrine to tragedy. It struck the right balance, respectful without being morbid, honoring without dwelling. But for Mrs. Williams, teaching in that room carried an unexpected pressure. She found herself wondering if she was inspiring her students the way Tara had inspired hers. She organized study groups and stayed late to help struggling students, driven by a standard set by someone she had never met. "Do you think they'll ever find her?" a student asked one day after seeing a news story about the podcast. Mrs. Williams didn't have an answer. 11 years of silence had taught the community not to expect resolution. The case had become part of Ocilla's identity. The small town where a teacher disappeared and was never found. The plaque watched over a new generation of students who would leave Irwin County High School and spread across the world, carrying with them the story of a teacher who had vanished into the Georgia night. February 23, 2017 started like any other Thursday in Ocilla. Agent Rothel was in his Atlanta office reviewing unrelated case files when his phone rang at 2:15 p.m. The voice on the other end was excited, almost breathless. "We've got something," said Detective Jason Chall from the Ocilla Police Department. "You need to get down here now." The drive from Atlanta to Ocilla had never felt longer. Rothel had made this trip dozens of times over the past 11 years, usually chasing leads that evaporated under scrutiny. This time felt different. The urgency in Shale's voice carried something that had been missing from the investigation for years. Genuine breakthrough. Ryan Duke's confession transcript would fill 37 pages when fully typed. The interview had started routinely. Investigators had been working their way through former students and recent drug arrests, looking for any connection to Tarara's disappearance. Ryan's name had come up in connection with a burglary investigation, and detectives thought he might have information about criminal activity in the area around 2005. They hadn't expected him to confess to murder. "I killed Tara Grinstead," Ryan had said, the words tumbling out almost accidentally during what was supposed to be a routine interview about break-ins. The confession room fell silent. Detective Chadell had been taking notes about stolen property and drug deals. Suddenly he was writing down details about the most important unsolved case in Georgia. "I broke into her house to steal stuff," Ryan continued, his voice flat with exhaustion or relief. "She woke up. I panicked. I hit her. The transcript captured every hesitation, every pause, every detail that had been locked away for over 11 years. Ryan described entering through Tarara's bedroom window. "The confrontation, the moment when everything went wrong, I called Bo," Ryan said. "Bo Dukes, he helped me." Two names that had been part of the community all along. Two young men who had sat in Tarara's classroom, learned from her lessons, received her encouragement. Two former students who had hidden her death for over a decade. The breakthrough that everyone had prayed for had finally come. But it brought with it a revelation so devastating that it would shatter what little trust remained in Ocilla. The pecan orchard lay just outside town, acres of trees that had stood for generations, their branches heavy with nuts each fall. Ryan Duke led investigators to the spot where he claimed Tarara's body had been burned, his footsteps uncertain across ground that had kept it secret for 12 years. The soil samples collected that day would be analyzed for months. Scientists searching for chemical traces of a fire that had consumed more than just one woman's remains. "This is where Bo brought me," Ryan told Detective Rothel, pointing to a clearing between two massive pecan trees. "We burned everything here." The pecan orchard soil samples became the most important physical evidence in a case that had been built on theories and speculation for over a decade. Technicians from the GBI crime lab would examine each handful of dirt, looking for burned bone fragments, dental material, anything that might confirm Ryan's account. The orchard belonged to Bo Dukes' family, a detail that made Ryan's story more credible and more heartbreaking. This wasn't some random location chosen by panicked killers. It was Bo's backyard, a place where he had played as a child, where family gatherings had been held for years. "I was high," Ryan continued, his confession spilling out in fragments that detectives worked to piece together. "We were both high. Bo said he knew what to do." According to Ryan's account, Bo Dukes had taken charge after the initial panic. Bo had connections, knowledge of the area, access to equipment. Bo had turned an accidental killing into a methodical cover-up that lasted over a decade. The soil analysis would take months, but preliminary tests showed evidence of an intense fire in the exact location Ryan had identified. Chemical traces suggested organic material had been burned there, though after 12 years and countless rain seasons, definitive proof would be difficult to establish. Standing in that orchard, Detective Rothel felt a mixture of relief and revulsion. After 11 years of searching rivers and forests, of following false leads and chasing shadows, the answer had been hiding in plain sight. Two local boys, former students, members of the community that had spent years grieving and searching. The pecan trees had watched it all happen. They had stood silent witness to a crime that changed everything, their roots growing deeper into soil that held unspeakable secrets. Sunday service at Ocilla Church of God had never felt heavier. Pastor Eddie Wilder stood before a congregation that had spent 12 years praying for answers, and now struggled to process the answers they had received. The arrests of Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes had shattered assumptions that many had held about their community, their neighbors, their own ability to recognize evil. "Lord, we don't understand why this happened," Pastor Wilder said during the prayer time that had been reserved for Tara Grinstead every Sunday since 2005. "But we trust in your justice and your mercy." The church prayer list had carried Tara's name since the week she disappeared. Hundreds of Sundays, thousands of prayers, countless pleas for her safe return, or at least for answers. The prayer list had become worn and reprinted dozens of times, but Tara's name had remained constant. Now the prayer list needed revision. Instead of asking for Tara's safe return, the congregation found themselves praying for her family's peace, for justice in the courts, and for their own community's healing. Marie Grinstead sat in the same pew where she had sat every Sunday for 12 years. But now she carried a different kind of burden. The uncertainty was over, but it had been replaced by something worse. The knowledge of exactly how her sister had died and who had hidden that truth for so long. "I keep thinking about Bo's grandmother," whispered one church member to another. "She's such a sweet lady. How is she going to handle this?" The revelation that two local young men had been responsible for Tara's death fractured relationships throughout the community. Families found themselves divided, some members defending the accused, others expressing outrage that the truth had been hidden for so long. Children who had grown up with Ryan and Bo as classmates struggled to reconcile their memories of quiet, unremarkable boys with the image of killers. Parents wondered how they had missed signs, what they should have seen, what warnings they had ignored. The arrests had brought answers, but answers weren't the same as closure. If anything, knowing the truth made the betrayal more painful. The community that had rallied together to search for Tarara now found itself searching for a way to live with the knowledge that her killers had been among them all along. Bo Duke sat in the defendant's chair on May 8, 2019. His hands folded as the judge read his sentence, 25 years in prison. The court sentencing document was brief, clinical in its language, but it represented the first measure of justice in the Tara Grinstead case. Bo had been convicted not of murder but of concealing a death, hindering apprehension of a criminal and tampering with evidence. "Mr. Dukes," said Judge Bill Reinhart, "you had numerous opportunities over the past 14 years to come forward with the truth. Instead, you chose to let Miss Grinstead's family suffer." Tara's family sat in the front row of the courtroom, their faces showing exhaustion more than satisfaction. Marie Grinstead had aged visibly during the 2 years since the arrests, the weight of finally knowing the truth about her sister's death taking its own toll. Bose's sentencing had been negotiated as part of his cooperation with prosecutors, building the case against Ryan Duke. He had eventually admitted to helping burn Tarara's body and to lying to investigators for years. But his cooperation came too late to spare him significant prison time. The courtroom was packed with reporters and community members who had followed the case since 2005. Many had expected this moment to feel more triumphant. But the reality of justice delivered carried its own sadness. During the proceedings, details emerged about the years of silence that had followed Tarara's death. Bo had continued living in Ocilla, attending community events, maintaining friendships, all while carrying the secret of what had happened in that peon orchard. The defendant's actions caused immeasurable pain to the victim's family and to this community, the prosecutor stated during sentencing arguments. For 14 years, he watched this family suffer, while he could have provided answers. The sentencing document would become part of the permanent record, a legal acknowledgement that justice, however delayed, was still possible. But for Tarara's family, Bose's conviction was only the first step. The main event, Ryan Duke's trial for murder, still lay ahead. The trial postponement notice arrived on a cold January morning in 2020, stamped with official seals that couldn't mask the disappointment it carried. Due to the ongoing health emergency and court scheduling conflicts, the trial of Ryan Duke has been postponed until further notice. Read the document that Marie Grinstead held with shaking hands. It was the fourth delay in Ryan Duke's trial, each postponement stretching the family's emotional endurance thinner. What should have been a straightforward prosecution had become a labyrinth of legal motions, discovery disputes, and procedural delays that seemed designed to test everyone's patience. "Justice delayed is justice denied," Marie told reporters outside the courthouse, her voice carrying the weight of nearly 15 years of waiting. The postponement notice had become a symbol of a legal system that moved too slowly for families trapped in grief. Ryan Duke's defense team had raised questions about his original confession, claiming he had been coerced and that his statements were unreliable. They argued that Bo Dukes, not Ryan, had been the primary actor in Tarara's death. The legal wrangling over evidence and testimony created delays that stretched months into years. The CO9 pandemic added another layer of complexity to an already complicated case. Court schedules were disrupted. Jury selection became more difficult. Witnesses worried about travel and exposure. What should have been a 2020 trial became a 2021 trial, then a 2022 trial. For Tarara's family, each postponement felt like another small betrayal. They had waited 12 years for arrests. Now they were waiting years more for trial. The legal system that was supposed to deliver justice seemed designed to test their endurance instead. "We've been patient," Marie said during one of many courthouse visits that ended in disappointment. "But our patience isn't unlimited." The postponement notices accumulated in Marie's files, creating a paper trail of frustration that paralleled the original investigation files. Each delay had its own bureaucratic justification, but collectively, they represented a system that seemed incapable of moving at the speed of human need. Still, they waited because waiting was the only option left. March 21, 2022 brought the moment that Ocilla had been waiting for 17 years to see. The jury selection process for Ryan Duke's murder. Trial had taken 3 weeks as attorneys questioned hundreds of potential jurors about their knowledge of a case that had dominated South Georgia news for nearly 2 decades. Finding 12 people who could approach the evidence with fresh eyes had proven almost impossible in a region where everyone had an opinion about Tara Grinstead's disappearance. The jury selection records revealed the challenge of prosecuting a case that had become part of local folklore. Potential jurors had heard the podcast, seen the news coverage, or participated in the original search efforts. Many had already formed opinions about Ryan Duke's guilt or innocence. Have you ever contributed to the reward fund for information about Tara Grinstead became a standard question during voir dire? More than half the potential jurors raised their hands. Judge Bill Reinhardt presided over a courtroom packed with reporters, family members, and curious citizens who had been following the case since 2005. The trial that many thought would never come had finally arrived, carrying with it the weight of a community's long-deferred hope for answers. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Prosecutor Bradby began his opening statement. This case is about a young woman whose life was stolen from her, and about a man who has lived with that secret for 17 years. Ryan Duke sat at the defense table, now 36 years old, his face bearing little resemblance to the young man who had supposedly confessed to killing his former teacher. His attorneys had spent years building a defense around the argument that his confession had been coerced and unreliable. The prosecution's opening painted a picture of a break-in gone wrong, of panic and violence, of a cover-up that had lasted nearly 2 decades. The defense countered with questions about memory, coercion, and the reliability of statements made under pressure. Tara's family sat in the front row, faces that had aged visibly during the years of waiting. They had dreamed of this moment for so long that its arrival felt almost surreal. Finally, after 17 years, they would hear the complete truth about what happened to Tara Grinstead. The witness testimony transcripts would eventually fill over 800 pages. Day after day, prosecutors called witnesses who painted a picture of the night Tara died and the years of silence that followed. GBI agents described the investigation that had consumed thousands of hours and followed thousands of leads. Former classmates testified about Ryan Duke's behavior in the years after Tara's disappearance. He seemed nervous whenever her name came up, testified one former classmate, like he didn't want to talk about it. The most devastating testimony came from Bo Dukes himself, who took the stand to detail his role in concealing Tara's death, speaking from prison where he was serving his 25-year sentence. Bo described receiving a panicked phone call from Ryan Duke in October 2005. He said he had done something terrible. Bo testified. He said he had killed Miss Grinstead. Bo's testimony provided details that only someone present could have known the exact location in the pan orchard where Tara's body had been burned. The accelerant used to fuel the fire, the disposal of evidence that had kept the crime hidden for over a decade. The transcripts captured moments of raw emotion as Tara's family listened to testimony about her final moments. Marie Grinstead wept openly as Bo described the fire that had consumed her sister's remains, reducing a beloved teacher to ashes scattered in a Georgia pan grove. Ryan Duke's defense team fought back with their own witnesses, including experts who questioned the reliability of confessions made under stress. They pointed to inconsistencies in Ryan's various statements to police, arguing that a guilty man's story shouldn't change so dramatically. My client was pressured into confessing to a crime he didn't commit, argued defense attorney Ashley Merchant. The real killer is the man sitting in prison, Bo Dukes. The witness transcripts revealed a case built on fragments, pieces of memory, soil samples, recorded phone calls, and the testimony of a man trying to reduce his own sentence. After 17 years, the truth remained elusive, filtered through the unreliable lens of human memory and self-interest. But the jury had to decide based on what they heard, not what they wished they knew. Ryan Duke's defense team filed motion after motion, each document a desperate attempt to create reasonable doubt. The defense motion documents filled 3 large binders containing arguments about coerced confessions, unreliable witnesses, and prosecutorial misconduct. Ryan's attorneys had built their case around a simple premise. Their client was a drug-addicted young man who had been manipulated into confessing to a crime committed by someone else. Mr. Duke was under the influence of drugs during his confession, argued defense attorney John Merchant. He was sleep-deprived, intimidated, and told what to say by investigators who were desperate to solve a high-profile case. The defense motions challenged every aspect of the prosecution's case. They questioned the chain of custody for physical evidence. They argued that Bo Duke's testimony was unreliable because he was trying to minimize his own culpability. They claimed that Ryan's confession contained details that could have been fed to him by investigators. "Show us the physical evidence," Merchant demanded during cross-examination of GBI agents. "Show us DNA, show us fingerprints, show us anything besides the word of a convicted felon and a coerced confession." The defense had a point. After 17 years, physical evidence was scarce. The soil samples from the pecan orchard showed evidence of burning, but couldn't definitively prove that human remains had been destroyed there. No DNA evidence linked Ryan to Tarara's house. No witnesses had seen him near her property on the night she disappeared. The case rested almost entirely on Ryan's confession and Bose's corroborating testimony, two sources that the defense argued were fundamentally unreliable. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Merchant said during his closing argument, "the burden of proof in this case is beyond a reasonable doubt. Not beyond any doubt, but beyond reasonable doubt. And when the state's case rests on the word of a man trying to save himself and a confession that changes every time it's told, how can you say there's no reasonable doubt?" The defense motions had succeeded in raising questions, but questions weren't the same as answers. The jury would have to decide whether the doubts were reasonable enough to acquit a man who had confessed to murder. Tarara's sister, Marie, stepped to the witness stand on the trial's final day, carrying with her a statement that had taken 17 years to write. "My name is Marie Grinstead," she began, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened to overwhelm her. "Tara was my sister, my best friend, and the brightest light in our family." The family impact statement was brief but devastating in its simplicity. Marie spoke about the sister who had called her every Sunday, who remembered every birthday and anniversary, who had dreams of marriage and children that would never be fulfilled. "For 17 years we've lived with questions," Marie continued. "We've wondered if she suffered. We've wondered if she was afraid. We've wondered if she thought about us in her final moments." The courtroom was silent as Marie described the family holidays with empty chairs, the phone calls that would never come, the graduations and weddings and births that Tara would never celebrate. She spoke about a family permanently fractured by loss, held together only by their shared determination to find justice. "Tara loved her students," Marie said, looking directly at Ryan Duke. "She believed in young people. She saw potential in everyone. She would have helped you if you had asked." The impact statement wasn't just about loss. It was about the ripple effects of violence. The way one act of panic had damaged dozens of lives. Students who had lost a beloved teacher. A family torn apart by grief. A community forced to live with betrayal and mistrust. "We forgive you," Marie said finally, the words coming out like a prayer. But forgiveness doesn't mean there shouldn't be consequences. Tara's mother, who had died in 2019 without seeing justice for her daughter, was represented by a photograph that Marie held throughout her testimony. 3 generations of women bound together by love and separated by violence. The impact statement wouldn't influence the jury's verdict. They had already deliberated and reached their decision. But it gave voice to the human cost of the crime they were about to judge. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Reinhardt's question echoed through the packed courtroom as the foreman stood with a folded piece of paper that would end 17 years of uncertainty. "We have, Your Honor." The closing argument notes from both sides lay scattered across attorneys' tables, pages of legal reasoning and emotional appeals that had consumed 3 days of testimony. Prosecutor Bradby had argued that Ryan Duke's confession, despite its inconsistencies, contained details that only the killer could have known. The defense had countered that those details could have been provided by investigators desperate to solve their most famous case. "Will the defendant please rise?" Ryan Duke stood beside his attorneys, his face pale in the fluorescent courtroom lighting 17 years after Tara Grinstead disappeared. Her former student was about to learn his fate. In the matter of the state of Georgia versus Ryan Alexander Duke on the charge of malice murder, we the jury find the defendant not guilty. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Marie Grinstead's face crumpled in confusion and disbelief on the charge of felony murder. We the jury find the defendant guilty. The distinction was crucial. The jury had concluded that Ryan Duke hadn't intended to kill Tara Grinstead, but that her death had occurred during the commission of another felony, breaking and entering. It was a verdict that acknowledged guilt while rejecting the prosecution's theory of premeditated murder. On the charge of aggravated assault, we the jury find the defendant guilty. On the charge of burglary, we the jury find the defendant guilty. On the charge of concealing the death of another, we the jury find the defendant guilty. The closing arguments had lasted 6 hours, but the verdict took less than 6 minutes to read. 17 years of investigation, months of trial preparation, and weeks of testimony had culminated in a decision that satisfied no one completely, but delivered the justice that the legal system could provide. Ryan Duke showed no emotion as the verdicts were read. His attorneys patted his shoulder in consolation for the murder conviction and relief at avoiding the death penalty. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Judge Reinhardt delivered Ryan Duke's sentence on June 27, 2022. His voice carrying the weight of finality that had been missing from the case for nearly 2 decades. The life sentence judgment was typed on official court letterhead, but its real meaning was written in the faces of everyone who had gathered for this moment. "Mr. Duke," the judge said, looking directly at the man who had sat in Tara Grinstead's classroom as a teenager. "You have robbed this community of a remarkable woman. You have caused immeasurable pain to her family. No sentence can undo that harm, but this sentence ensures you will never hurt anyone again." Ryan Duke stood silently as his sentence was read, showing the same flat affect he had displayed throughout the trial. His attorneys had asked for mercy, citing his drug addiction and troubled childhood. But the judge had found no mitigating factors strong enough to justify a lesser sentence. The life sentence judgment document was brief 2 pages that summarized 17 years of investigation and weeks of trial. But for Tarara's family, it represented something more significant. The official acknowledgement that their sister had been wronged, and that society demanded accountability. "Justice has been served," Marie Grinstead told reporters outside the courthouse, though her voice carried more exhaustion than satisfaction. "It won't bring Tara back, but it ensures that he can never hurt another family the way he hurt ours." The sentence meant Ryan Duke would spend the rest of his life in a Georgia state prison, his future measured in decades of concrete and steel, rather than the dreams and possibilities that Tara Grinstead would never realize. Bo Dukes, already serving his own 25-year sentence, would likely die in prison as well. 2 young men who had once been Tara's students had destroyed not only her life but their own. The cycle of destruction that began in October 2005 was finally complete. The memorial service was held on a warm October evening in 2022, exactly 17 years after Tara Grinstead disappeared. More than 1,000 people gathered in the Irwin County High School auditorium, where Tara had coached beauty pageants and encouraged students to reach for their dreams. The memorial service program was elegant in its simplicity. Tara's photograph on the cover surrounded by scripture verses about eternal life and everlasting peace. "Tonight we don't gather to remember Tara's death," said Pastor Eddie Wilder, who had led the community's prayers for 17 years. "We gather to celebrate her life and the ways she continues to touch us." Students who had been in elementary school when Tara disappeared, now adults with children of their own, shared memories passed down from older siblings. Teachers who had worked alongside her spoke about her dedication and kindness. Former beauty pageant contestants, now mothers themselves, remembered how Tara had taught them to believe in themselves. The memorial service represented something different from the vigils that had marked each anniversary of Tara's disappearance. Those gatherings had been about hope and uncertainty, about refusing to give up in the face of silence. This service was about acceptance and remembrance, about a community finally able to grieve properly. Marie Grinstead spoke last, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd that had supported her family through nearly 2 decades of uncertainty. "Tara would be amazed to see all of you here." Marie said she never thought of herself as special, but she was special to everyone she met. She saw potential in every student, hope in every situation, of light in every darkness. The program from that final memorial service would be kept by hundreds of people, tucked into Bibles and photo albums, as a reminder of a teacher who had touched too many lives to count. Her classroom was empty, but her influence lived on in the students she had inspired and the community she had loved. As the service ended and people dispersed into the October night, candles flickered throughout Ocilla one last time. The long search was over. The questions were answered. The justice was served.